Richard Montenegro's perfect world unravels when he discovers his adopted daughter Sophia wearing a locket that belonged to his late mother. Its secrets lead to buried truths, family betrayal, and redemption as love and courage rebuild their broken legacy. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Richard Montenegro stood at the window of his penthouse office, staring at the Manhattan skyline. The view from the 50th floor of Montenegro Enterprises should have made him feel on top of the world. Instead, he felt empty inside. All the money in his bank accounts couldn't give him the one thing he wanted most, a child of his own. "Mr. Montenegro, your 2 o'clock appointment is here," his secretary Barbara announced through the intercom. "Send them in," Richard replied, straightening his designer tie. Another business meeting, another deal to close. At 45, he had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes, but his massive apartment felt too quiet every night. Dr. Harrison, his fertility specialist, had delivered the final verdict last week. "I'm sorry, Mr. Montenegro, but having biological children isn't possible for you." The words still echoed in his head, haunting him day and night. That evening, as Richard's driver Thomas took him home, they passed through one of the poorest neighborhoods in the city. At a red light, he noticed a little girl sitting on a broken stoop, doing homework under a flickering street lamp. Something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was the determined look on her face as she worked, despite her surroundings. "Thomas, stop the car," Richard ordered. He got out, surprising his driver. The girl looked up as Richard approached. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, wearing clothes that had clearly seen better days, but her eyes, they sparkled with intelligence and spirit. "Hi there," Richard said gently. "What are you studying?" "Math," she answered confidently. "I'm Sophia. I'm going to be a doctor someday." A woman appeared in the doorway, wearing a waitress uniform that had seen better days. "Sophia, come inside now." She looked worried, seeing the well-dressed stranger talking to her daughter. "I'm Richard Montenegro," he introduced himself. "Your daughter is quite remarkable." The woman, Elena Martinez, hesitated before responding. "She's always been special. But life hasn't been easy since her father lost his job at the factory." Richard looked around at the crumbling building, the broken windows, the unsafe conditions. In that moment, something clicked in his mind. He could give this child everything: education, opportunities, a real chance at life. And maybe, just maybe, fill the void in his own heart. "Mrs. Martinez, would you and your husband be willing to meet with me? I'd like to discuss something important." Over the next few weeks, Richard visited the Martinez family regularly. He saw how they struggled to make ends meet, living in a one-room apartment with barely enough food. Sophia's father, Manuel, worked odd jobs, but couldn't find steady employment. The family was drowning in medical bills from when Sophia had pneumonia last winter. Richard made his proposal one evening, sitting at their wobbly kitchen table. "I want to adopt Sophia, legally, properly. I'll provide for her education, her future. She'll want for nothing." He pulled out a check that made Elena gasp. "This would be immediate compensation for your family to help you start fresh." Manuel's face darkened. "We're not selling our daughter." "It's not like that," Richard insisted. "I can give her opportunities you can't. She could go to the best schools, become that doctor she dreams of being. And you'll be able to visit, of course. Think about what's best for Sophia." Eleanor and Manuel argued late into the night after Richard left. They loved their daughter more than anything, but they could barely keep her fed. The heating had been shut off twice last winter. Sophia deserved better than this life of constant struggle. After a month of discussions, tears, and soul-searching, they agreed. The lawyers drew up the papers, making everything legal and proper. Richard arranged for the Martinez family to move into a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, with Manuel enrolled in a job training program. The day Sophia was to move into Richard's penthouse arrived. She carried a small backpack with her few belongings, trying to be brave despite her tears. Eleanor hugged her tightly, whispering words of love and encouragement. Richard knelt down to Sophia's level. "Ready to see your new home?" That's when he saw it. Around Sophia's neck hung a golden locket with an intricate design he would recognize anywhere. His heart nearly stopped. It was impossible. That locket had disappeared 20 years ago when his mother died. He'd searched everywhere for it, his mother's most precious possession. "Sophia," he asked, his voice shaking, "where did you get that necklace?" "My Grandma Maria gave it to me before she died," Sophia answered simply. "She said it would protect me." Richard felt the world spin around him. Maria, his mother's best friend, who vanished all those years ago after a huge fight with his father. The locket that had been in his family for generations, now hanging around the neck of this little girl he was about to adopt. As he helped Sophia into his car, Richard knew this was more than coincidence. Somehow, his mother's locket had found its way back to him, bringing with it a child who might finally fill the emptiness in his heart, and mysteries he never expected to uncover. Looking at Sophia's reflection in his rearview mirror, Richard realized his life would never be the same. The locket that had been lost for so long now connected him to this child in ways he couldn't yet understand. As they drove toward his penthouse, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Sophia's eyes went wide as the elevator doors opened directly into Richard's penthouse apartment. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows showed views of Central Park that made the little girl gasp. "This is where I'm going to live?" she asked, clutching her worn backpack tighter. "Yes," Richard answered, but his mind was still on the locket around her neck. He couldn't stop staring at it. "Let me show you your room." He led her down a hallway to a bedroom bigger than her family's entire old apartment. The walls were painted a soft pink, with a canopy bed and a desk for studying. A row of new dolls sat on a shelf, and a closet full of clothes waited for her. "Mrs. Peterson, my housekeeper, helped set everything up," Richard explained. "She'll be here during the day to help take care of you." Sophia walked to the window, then turned back to Richard with tears in her eyes. "Can I call my mum?" Richard's heart ached. "Of course you can. You can call them whenever you want." He pulled out a new iPhone from a drawer. "This is yours now. I already programmed their number in it." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the locket. Maria had been like a second mother to him when he was young. She and his mother, Elizabeth, had been inseparable friends since college. Then came that terrible fight with his father. James Montenegro, and Maria disappeared. His mother had been heartbroken, and a month later she died in a car accident. The locket had vanished with her. The next morning, Richard called his private investigator, Frank Cooper. "Frank, I need you to look into someone. Maria, I don't know her last name, but she died recently. She would have been in her 60s. She was connected to a family named Martinez." "The family of the girl you just adopted?" Frank asked. "Yes, and Frank, she had my mother's locket. I need to know everything." At breakfast, Sophia sat quietly at the massive dining room table, looking lost in her new surroundings. Mrs. Peterson had prepared pancakes, but the girl barely touched them. "Sophia," Richard said gently, "tell me about your grandmother Maria." Sophia's face lit up. "Grandma Maria was the best. She told the best stories, and she always said I was special. When she was sick, she gave me this." She touched the locket. "She said it belonged to an angel who watched over good people." Richard's throat tightened. That's exactly how his mother Elizabeth had described the locket's meaning. Later that day, while Sophia was getting settled in her room, Frank called back. "I found her boss, Maria Ramirez. She died 6 months ago from cancer. She was Elena Martinez's mother, Sophia's grandmother. But here's where it gets interesting. 20 years ago, she worked as a housekeeper for a wealthy family on the Upper East Side." Richard's hands started shaking. "My family? She worked for my family?" "There's more," Frank continued. "I found old bank records. The day before she disappeared, your father transferred a large sum of money to her account, $200,000. Richard felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. His father had paid Maria to leave, but why? That afternoon, Richard watched as Sophia did her homework at her new desk. She was smart, picking things up quickly, just like his mother had been. Looking at her now, he noticed something he hadn't before. Her eyes. They were hazel, with flecks of gold, just like his mother's eyes. A terrible suspicion began to form in his mind. His father, James Montenegro, was still alive, living in a mansion in the Hamptons. They barely spoke anymore, hadn't really talked since his mother's death, but now Richard knew he needed answers. "Mrs. Peterson," he called out, "please watch Sophia for the afternoon. I need to visit my father." The drive to the Hamptons was long, giving Richard too much time to think. The locket had been in his family for generations, passed down from mother to daughter. His mother would never have given it away, unless Maria meant something more to her than just a friend. James Montenegro was in his study when Richard arrived unannounced. At 70, he was still an imposing figure, his white hair the only sign of his age. "Richard, this is unexpected," James said, not getting up from behind his desk. Richard pulled out his phone and showed his father a picture of Sophia wearing the locket. James's face went pale. "Where did you get that?" James demanded. "From the granddaughter of Maria Ramirez, the woman you paid to disappear 20 years ago, the woman who was Mom's best friend." Richard's voice shook with anger. "I want the truth, Dad, all of it. Why did Maria have Mom's locket? Why did you pay her to leave? And why does her granddaughter have Mom's eyes?" James Montenegro slumped in his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. "You don't want to." "No, son, some secrets should stay buried. Mom died a month after Maria left. She died thinking her best friend had abandoned her. I deserve to know why." James walked to his bar and poured himself a drink with trembling hands. "Your mother. She couldn't have children. We tried for years. Maria agreed to be a surrogate, secretly. She carried you, Richard. She gave birth to you. Elizabeth raised you as her own, but Maria was your biological mother." Richard felt the room spin. "What?" "When Maria threatened to tell you the truth, I paid her to disappear. I couldn't let Elizabeth's memory be tainted. She loved you so. Much thought of you as her own. The locket. Elizabeth must have given it to Maria before she died. A final gift to the woman who gave her a son." Richard sank into a chair, his world turning upside down. All these years he'd carried Montenegro blood, but also Maria's. And now, by some twist of fate, he'd adopted her granddaughter, his own niece. As he drove back to the city, Richard's mind raced. Sophia wasn't just some girl he'd adopted, she was family, real family. The locket hadn't just found its way back to him by chance, it had led him to his own blood. When he got home, Sophia was watching TV in the living room. She smiled when she saw him, and his heart filled with a new kind of love. She wasn't just his adopted daughter anymore. She was a missing piece of his family puzzle, brought back to him by his mother's golden locket. "Everything okay?" Sophia asked, noticing his strange expression. Richard sat down beside her and touched the locket gently. "Everything's perfect, sweetheart. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." But he knew this was just the beginning. There were more secrets to uncover, and his father's revelation would change everything. Not just for him and Sophia, but for the entire Montenegro family. Richard spent a sleepless night pacing his penthouse apartment. Every few hours he would peek into Sophia's room, watching her sleep peacefully, unaware that her world was about to change. The golden locket gleamed in the moonlight on her bedside table. The next morning, his lawyer Patricia Watson sat across from him in his home office, reviewing the documents he'd requested about Maria Ramirez. "This is quite a situation, Richard," Patricia said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Finding out Maria was your biological mother makes Sophia your niece. It actually strengthens your legal claim to her. But the circumstances of how you found her, could Elena and Manuel challenge the adoption?" Richard asked, worried about losing Sophia now that he knew who she really was. "They signed away their rights legally. But Richard, they deserve to know the truth. Sophia deserves to know." Before Richard could respond, Mrs. Peterson knocked on the door. "Mr. Montenegro, your father is here." James Montenegro walked in looking tired and old. "We need to talk about what happens next." "I'll give you privacy," Patricia said, gathering her papers. "No, stay," Richard ordered. "We need a witness for whatever he has to say." James sank into a leather chair. "I've been up all night thinking. The Montenegro name means something in this city. If word gets out about Maria, about the real circumstances of your birth, Is that all you care about? Richard exploded. Your precious reputation? I just found out my whole life was a lie. Their raised voices carried through the penthouse. Sophia appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas. Dad? Is everything okay? The word dad hit Richard differently now. He forced a smile. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Why don't you have breakfast with Mrs. Peterson? After Sophia left, James leaned forward. I have a proposal. Let me set up a trust fund for Sophia. $10 million. She'll be taken care of. For life. In exchange, we keep this quiet. No one ever needs to know about Maria. You want to buy my silence, just like you bought Maria's? Richard's voice dripped with disgust. Get out. Think about it, James insisted. Think about Sophia. Does she really need to know her family history is built on lies? After James left, Patricia touched Richard's arm gently. He has a point. About Sophia. She's only 8. Learning everything at once might be too much for her. Richard walked to the window, watching the morning sun reflect off nearby buildings. I need to tell Elena and Manuel first. They deserve to know who I really am. That afternoon, Richard sat in Elena and Manuel's new apartment. The place was modest but clean, much better than their old home. Elena served coffee in mismatched cups, while Manuel watched Richard suspiciously. What's this about? Manuel asked. Is Sophia okay? Richard took a deep breath. Sophia is perfect, but I discovered something about her grandmother. About Maria. Eleanor's eyes went to a photo of her mother on the wall. What about Mama? Richard pulled out an old photograph he'd found in his father's study. It showed his mother, Elizabeth, and Maria, both young and beautiful, arms around each other. Your mother was more than just my family's housekeeper. She was my biological mother. The coffee cup slipped from Elena's hands, shattering on the floor. What? Richard explained everything. About his mother Elizabeth being unable to have children, about Maria being a surrogate, about his father's payoff and Maria's disappearance. Elena listened with tears streaming down her face. Mama never said. She never told me, Elena whispered. That means... Manuel's eyes widened. You're Elena's brother, Sophia's uncle. Yes, Richard confirmed. When I saw that locket around Sophia's neck, it led me to the truth. Your daughter isn't just my adopted child. She's my flesh and blood. Elena suddenly stood up and ran to her bedroom. She returned with a small box. Mama left this for Sophia, to give to her when she was older. I haven't opened it. Inside was a letter and a small diary. Richard recognized Maria's handwriting from the note she'd left behind 20 years ago. My dearest Sophia, the letter began. There are things you need to know about our family, about the locket you wear, and about a baby boy I carried for a woman named Elizabeth Montenegro. Elena's hands shook as she read. All these years I had a brother, a rich, successful brother, while we struggled so much. I didn't know, Richard said softly. If I had known, I would have helped. You have to believe that. Manuel put his arm around his wife. What do we tell Sophia? The truth, Richard said firmly, but carefully, slowly. She needs to understand that she was loved by so many people, by Elizabeth, who wanted a child so badly, by Maria, who gave up so much, by you two, who sacrificed to give her a better life, and by me. Eleanor wiped her tears. Will you take her away from us now? Now that you know she's really your family? No, Richard assured them. You're her parents. I'm just lucky to be part of her life. But I want us to be a real family now. All of us. No more secrets, no more separation. As if on cue, his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Peterson. Sophia was asking when she could visit her parents. Let me bring her here tomorrow, Richard suggested. We can start telling her the story of her amazing grandmother and how she brought our family back together through a golden locket. As Richard drove home that evening, he felt lighter despite the weight of all that had happened. The emptiness that had plagued him for so long was gone, filled now with something better than he could have imagined. Not just a daughter, but a whole family he never knew he had. The golden locket had done more than find its way home. It had healed old wounds, revealed buried truths, and brought together a family torn apart by secrets and lies. Now it rested around Sophia's neck, its work not yet finished, as more revelations and challenges awaited the newly united Montenegro family. The morning they planned to tell Sophia the truth, dark clouds hung over Manhattan. Richard, Elena, and Manuel sat in the living room of their apartment, watching Sophia play with her new tablet, completely unaware of how her life was about to change. "Sophia, honey," Elena called softly, "come sit with us. We have something important to tell you." Sophia looked up, her small fingers automatically reaching for the golden locket around her neck. She'd been doing that more often lately, as if drawing strength from it. "Am I in trouble?" she asked, moving to sit between her parents on the couch. "No, sweetheart," Richard said from his armchair. "We want to tell you a story about your Grandma Maria, about how special she was." Elena pulled out the box with Maria's diary and letter. "Your grandmother left these for you. She wanted you to know about your family, all of your family." For the next hour, they carefully explained to Sophia about Maria being Richard's biological mother, about Elizabeth Montenegro, who had loved Richard as her own, and about how the locket had brought them all together. Sophia listened with wide eyes, looking back and forth between Richard and her parents. "So, you're my uncle, my real uncle?" "Yes," Richard answered gently, "but I'm still your dad too, if you want me to be. Nothing has to change." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, playing with the locket. Then she asked, "Is that why Grandma Maria gave me this? Because it belonged to your other mom?" "Elizabeth," Richard corrected softly. "Yes, that's why. She was my mom in every way that mattered, just like Elena and Manuel are your real parents." Sophia got up and walked to Richard, wrapping her small arms around his neck. "I always wanted a big family," she whispered. The tender moment was interrupted by angry shouting in the hallway. The door burst open, and James Montenegro stormed in, followed by two men in suits. "This ends now," James announced. "I won't let you destroy our family's reputation with these lies." Richard jumped up, putting himself between James and Sophia. "How dare you barge in here? Get out!" "I tried to handle this quietly," James said, his face red with anger. "I offered you a solution, but you forced my hand." He turned to the men with him. "Show them." One of the men opened a briefcase and pulled out documents. "These are injunctions," he explained. "Mr. James Montenegro is challenging the adoption on grounds of fraud. He's also filing for emergency custody of the minor child based on her blood relation to the Montenegro family." Elena grabbed Sophia protectively. "You can't take her." "Watch me," James sneered. "I'm her great-uncle. I have rights, and I'll make sure she's raised properly away from all this scandal." "Dad, stop this madness," Richard pleaded. "She's just a child." "A Montenegro child," James corrected. "She belongs with her real family. We are her real family." Manuel stood up, his voice stronger than anyone had ever heard it. "Blood isn't just about names and money. It's about love." Sophia began to cry, clinging to Eleanor. The locket gleamed at her throat, catching James's. "Share that locket," he said, his voice suddenly different. "Elizabeth's locket." "The one she gave to Maria," Richard said. "The woman you paid to disappear. The woman who gave you a son and then had to watch from afar as he grew up without her." James staggered slightly, reaching for the wall to steady himself. For a moment, his mask of arrogance cracked, showing pain underneath. "You don't understand," he whispered. "Elizabeth was everything to me. When she couldn't have children, it broke her heart. Maria offered to help, but afterward she looked at you with such love. The same way Elizabeth did. I couldn't bear it. I couldn't share my family." "So you destroyed it instead," Richard said bitterly. "You sent my biological mother away, and a month later Elizabeth died thinking her best friend had abandoned her. Now you want to do the same thing to Sophia? Tear her away from the people who love her?" Sophia pulled away from Elena and walked up to James, still crying but standing straight. The locket caught the light, and for a moment she looked so much like Elizabeth that James gasped. "Please don't take me away," she said softly. "I love my mom and dad, and I love Uncle Richard, too." Grandma Maria's letter said love makes a family. She said the locket would protect me. James Montenegro, the powerful businessman who had spent decades building walls around his heart, felt those walls crumble as he looked into his great niece's eyes. Eyes that could have belonged to Elizabeth or Maria. He sank into a chair, suddenly looking old and tired. "I thought I was protecting our family," he said quietly. "But I've just been hurting it over and over." Richard knelt beside his father. "It's not too late to change that. Be part of our family, all of us. No more secrets, no more fighting. That's what Mum would have wanted." James looked around the room, at Richard, the son he'd nearly lost to pride, at Elena, the daughter Maria had raised with all the love she couldn't give her firstborn, at Manuel, who stood strong for his family despite his fears, and at Sophia, who wore Elizabeth's locket and carried the hope of healing 3 generations of pain. Slowly he nodded. "Call off the lawyers," he told his men. "The Montenegro family has been broken long enough." As the lawyers left, Sophia touched the locket again. "Can you tell me about Elizabeth?" she asked James. "What was she like?" For the first time in 20 years, James Montenegro smiled a real smile. "She was an angel," he said softly. "Just like your grandma Maria, and she would have loved you so much." Outside, the dark clouds finally broke, letting sunshine stream through the windows. The light caught the golden locket, making it shine like a beacon of hope for this newly united family. Still fragile but healing, one truth at a time. 3 months after the dramatic confrontation in Elena and Manuel's apartment, the Montenegro family was trying to build a new normal. Richard had moved Sophia to a bigger penthouse with a guest suite for her parents to stay whenever they wanted. James was making an effort to be part of their lives, though decades of keeping secrets made it difficult. But peace never lasts long in the lives of the wealthy and powerful. One morning, as Richard sat at his office desk reviewing contracts, his secretary Barbara rushed in without knocking. "Mr. Montenegro, you need to see this right away." She handed him a tablet with the society page of the New York Times pulled up. The headline made his blood run cold. "Montenegro family scandal, the secret child and the missing maid." "Who leaked this?" Richard demanded, scanning the article that laid bare their family's most private secrets. "We don't know," Barbara replied. "But it's everywhere. Social media, news sites, even the morning shows want interviews." Richard's phone started buzzing with messages. Elena, Manuel, his father. But the one that worried him most was from Mrs. Peterson. Sophia's school called. "Reporters are gathering outside." "Get my car ready," Richard ordered, grabbing his coat, "and call security." At Sophia's private school, reporters crowded the entrance. Camera flashes went off as Richard pushed through them, ignoring their questions. Inside, he found Sophia crying in the principal's office. "The other kids were saying mean things," she sobbed as Richard hugged her. "They said I wasn't really a Montenegro, that my family was poor and trying to steal money." "None of that matters," Richard said firmly. "We're family. That's all anyone needs to know." But it wasn't that simple. By evening, the story had exploded. Old photos of Maria surfaced online. Someone had dug up the original surrogate agreement. Worst of all, reporters ambushed Elena at her job, causing her to drop a tray of dishes and get burned by hot coffee. James Montenegro called an emergency family meeting at his Hamptons mansion. "We need to get ahead of this," he insisted, pacing the elaborate living room. "I've called the best PR firm in the city." "No more hiding," Richard argued. "No more spin. We tell the truth, all of it." "The board is demanding an emergency meeting," James continued as if he hadn't heard. "Our stock is already dropping. Everything I built could collapse." Manuel, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. "Your empire means more to you than your family." Still, before James could answer, Sophia walked in. She'd been exploring the mansion's many rooms, fascinated by the grand house. Now she held an old photo album. "Look what I found," she said excitedly, unaware of the tension in the room. Pictures of Elizabeth and Grandma Maria. The album was filled with memories from happier times. Elizabeth and Maria at college graduation. Family holidays. Baby pictures of Richard with both women smiling over his crib. "I remember that day," James said softly, looking at one photo. "Elizabeth was so happy. Maria had just agreed to be our surrogate. They both were glowing. Then why did you ruin it? Eleanor asked, her voice breaking. Why did you send my mother away? James stared at the photos for a long time before answering. I was afraid. Elizabeth and Maria had a bond I could never understand. When Richard was born, they were like two mothers sharing one child. I felt left out, the great James Montenegro, pushed aside by his housekeeper. So you pushed back, Richard said, with money and threats. I convinced myself I was protecting our family name. Really, I was just protecting my ego. James closed the album gently. And now it's all coming out anyway. Sophia, who had been listening quietly, reached for her locket. Can I say something? All the adults turned to look at her. Grandma Maria's letter said this locket was magic, that it brings truth to light and heals broken hearts. Maybe, she hesitated, then continued more confidently. Maybe the story getting out isn't bad. Maybe it's the locket's magic working. Eleanor wiped away tears. When did you get so wise, mi amor? She's right, Richard said suddenly. We stop hiding. Tomorrow I'll hold a press conference. We tell our story about love that crosses class, boundaries, about two amazing women who shared a child, about family being more than blood or money. The board won't like it, James warned. Then they can find a new CEO, Richard replied. I'm done living in fear of scandal. Sophia deserves better. We all do. Just then, Richard's phone buzzed. It was Patricia Watson, his lawyer. Richard? She said urgently. Someone else has come forward. A woman claiming to be Maria's other daughter. She says she has proof, and she wants what she calls her fair share of the Montenegro fortune. The room went silent as Richard shared the news. Eleanor shook her head in confusion. That's impossible, she insisted. I was an only child. Mama never... But James Montenegro's face had gone pale. He sank into his leather armchair, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Dad? Richard asked. What aren't you telling us? James looked at the photo album, then at the faces of his family. The family he'd tried so hard to control, only to see it growing and changing in ways he never expected. There's something else you need to know, he began. Something that happened the night Maria left. The golden locket at Sophia's throat seemed to shimmer in the fading evening light, as if anticipating yet another long-buried secret coming to the surface, another test of this family's newfound unity. James Montenegro's hands shook as he poured himself a drink. The family waited in tense silence for him to explain about Maria's other daughter. Her name is Victoria, he finally said. And she's my daughter too. Eleanor gasped. Richard stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. Sophia clutched her mother's hand, sensing the adult's distress. The night I told Maria to leave, James continued, staring into his glass. She told me she was pregnant. I didn't believe her. I thought it was a trick to get more money. I doubled her payoff to keep quiet about it. I have a sister, Eleanor whispered, all these years. And I have another aunt, Sophia said, touching her locket. Richard paced the room, trying to process this new betrayal. You didn't just send Maria away. You abandoned your own child. I convinced myself she was lying, James defended weakly. By the time I considered it might be true, too much time had passed. I told myself it was better to leave it alone. Patricia Watson, still on speakerphone, cleared her throat. The woman, Victoria, has documentation, birth certificate, DNA test results, even letters Maria wrote to James that were never sent. Where is she now? Richard demanded. She's asked to meet with the family tomorrow. She's staying at the Plaza Hotel. Eleanor stood up suddenly. I want to see her now. She's my sister. I've lost too much time already. Manuel tried to calm his wife. Elena, it's late. Maybe we should wait. No more waiting. Elena's voice cracked with emotion. My mother died carrying this secret. This woman is the only family I have left besides Sophia. You have us, Richard reminded her gently. It's not the same, Elena said. She's my sister, my blood. Sophia tugged at her mother's sleeve. Can I come too? I want to meet my aunt. The adults exchanged looks. Finally, Richard nodded. We'll all go, together. An hour later, The unlikely group gathered in the elegant lobby of the Plaza Hotel. Richard, Elena, Manuel, Sophia, and a very reluctant James. Patricia Watson had arranged the meeting. The woman who stepped out of the elevator took everyone's breath away. Victoria Martinez was Maria's daughter through and through. She had the same graceful way of moving, the same proud tilt of the chin. But her eyes were all James Montenegro. Eleanor moved forward first, tears streaming down her face. The sisters stared at each other, seeing their mother in each other's features. "I can't believe you're real," Eleanor whispered. Victoria's composed expression cracked slightly. "Mama told me about you. She wanted us to know each other, but..." Her eyes moved to James, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the expensive hotel carpet. "Hello, Father," she said coldly. "Surprised to see the problem you paid to go away?" "Victoria," Richard stepped forward. "I'm your brother. Well, half-brother. This is all a shock to us too." Victoria's lawyer, who had accompanied her, spoke up. "My client has spent years tracking down her family history, the emotional damage of growing up without a father, watching her sister's family struggle while the Montenegros lived in luxury." "Is that what this is about?" James interrupted. "Money? No," Victoria snapped. "This is about truth, about justice, about a man who threw away his daughter because she didn't fit into his perfect life." Sophia, who had been quiet until now, suddenly walked up to Victoria. "Your mom was my grandma," she said simply. "She gave me this locket before she died." She held up the golden pendant. She said it would bring our family together. Victoria's angry expression softened as she knelt to Sophia's level. "I remember that locket. Mama used to let me hold it sometimes, when she told me stories about her best friend Elizabeth and the baby boy she carried for her. That was my dad," Sophia said, pointing to Richard. "And now he's my dad and my uncle. It's kind of complicated." A small laugh escaped Victoria's lips, the first sign of warmth she'd shown. "Everything about this family is complicated, isn't it?" Eleanor touched her sister's arm. "Stay. Talk with us. Not about lawyers or money, just let me know my sister." Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." The group moved to a private dining room, where over coffee and tea, Victoria shared her story. How Maria had raised her alone in Boston, working multiple jobs to give her a good education. How she'd grown up knowing she had a sister and a father in New York, but was told the time wasn't right to reach out. How finding Maria's old letters after her death had finally pushed her to search for her family. "Mama never stopped loving this family," Victoria said, her eyes on James. "Even after everything, she kept every newspaper article about the Montenegros, every mention of Richard's success." James, who had been silent most of the evening, finally spoke. "I was a coward," he admitted. "I've spent my whole life running from the mess I made of this family. But seeing you now, you look so much like your mother." "I'm not interested in your regrets," Victoria said sharply. Then she softened slightly. "But maybe we can build something new for Mama's sake and for Elena and Sophia." Richard watched as his newfound sister and Elena talked, seeing their mother's mannerisms in both of them. Sophia had fallen asleep on a hotel sofa, the golden locket rising and falling with her peaceful breathing. "The locket really is magic," Elena said, smiling through tears. "It brought us all together." "Not magic," Victoria corrected, reaching out to touch the pendant gently. "Love, Mama's love, Elizabeth's love, it never really went away. It just waited for the right time to bring us back to each other." As the night grew late, plans were made. Victoria would stay in New York for a while. Elena insisted she stay, with them, instead of the hotel. There would be time to deal with lawyers and press and the family business later. For now they were just a family, broken and healing, complicated and imperfect, but together at last. The golden locket had done its work again, bringing another lost piece of the Montenegro family back where it belonged. But as Sophia slept, peacefully, unaware of the changing dynamics around her, none of the adults suspected that the biggest challenge to their newfound unity was still to come. 2 weeks after Victoria's dramatic appearance at the Plaza Hotel, the Montenegro family was still adjusting to their new reality. Victoria had moved into Elena and Manuel's apartment, getting to know her sister and niece. But not everything was as peaceful as it seemed. Late one night, Victoria sat in her temporary bedroom, speaking quietly on her phone. "Everything's going according to plan," she whispered. "They've accepted me completely, especially the little girl. Sophia's totally charmed." A man's voice responded from the other end. "Good. The more they trust you, the easier this will be. Just stick to the plan." "I don't know, Michael," Victoria hesitated. "Elena is so sweet, and Sophia, they're really my family." "Remember what they did to your mother," Michael said sharply. "Remember how the great James Montenegro threw her away like trash. This is our chance to take everything from them." Victoria touched a photo on her nightstand. Her mother, Maria, in her later years, looking tired but still beautiful. "You're right, I won't lose focus." The next morning, Richard called a family breakfast at his penthouse. Victoria watched him cooking pancakes for Sophia, playing the perfect father. James Montenegro sat at the table, actually trying to connect with his grandniece. It would make what she had to do harder, but she steeled herself against sympathy. "I've been thinking," Victoria announced. "I want to get more involved in the family business." James looked up sharply. "The company is going through enough turmoil with the press coverage of our situation." "That's exactly why you need me," Victoria argued. "I have an MBA from Harvard. I understand corporate restructuring. I can help stabilize things." Richard considered this. "She has a point, Dad. The board is nervous. Having another Montenegro step up might help." "I'm not a Montenegro," Victoria said with calculated bitterness. "Remember, I'm the secret shame you paid to go away." Elena touched her sister's arm. "Vicky, don't—" "No, he needs to hear this," Victoria continued, warming to her role. "I grew up watching my mother work herself to death while you lived in luxury. Sophia may have your name now, but I'm your flesh and blood too." James looked stricken. Richard noticed Sophia had stopped eating, watching the adults with worried eyes. "Maybe we should discuss this later," Richard suggested. "Fine," Victoria stood up. "I have a meeting anyway, a job interview." "Where?" Elena asked. "Davis Technologies." The room went silent. Michael Davis was Richard's biggest competitor and longtime enemy in the tech world. "You can't work for him," Richard said, firmly. "He's been trying to destroy our company for years," Victoria smiled coldly. "Maybe he just appreciates talent regardless of family drama." She left, letting the door slam behind her. As soon as she was in the elevator, she pulled out her phone. "Phase 1 complete," she texted Michael. "They took the bait." What Victoria didn't know was that Sophia had followed her to the elevator, worried about her new aunt. The little girl heard everything, clutching her locket as she listened to Victoria's quiet laugh. Sophia ran back to the dining room. "Dad! Uncle Richard!" "Aunt Victoria is—" But before she could finish, Victoria reappeared, having forgotten her purse. "Sophia, honey, want to have ice cream later? Just us girls?" Sophia looked at her aunt, then at her locket, remembering Grandma Maria's words about it protecting the family. She forced a smile. "Okay." That afternoon, while Victoria worked at her laptop in the living room, Sophia snuck into her bedroom. The girl knew it was wrong to snoop, but her grandmother's letter had said the locket would guide her to protect their family. Under Victoria's pillow, Sophia found a USB drive labeled Montenegro data. In the drawer there were photos, but not just old ones of Maria. New photos of the Montenegro office's security checkpoints, even Richard's private parking spot. Sophia's hands shook as she heard footsteps approaching. She quickly shoved everything back and pretended to be looking at family photos on the dresser. "Sophia," Victoria stood in the doorway. "What are you doing in here?" I wanted to see pictures of Grandma Maria," Sophia stammered. Victoria's expression softened, but something in her eyes remained sharp. "Next time ask first, okay? Some things aren't for little girls to see." That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. The locket felt heavy around her neck, like it was trying to tell her something. She knew Victoria was planning something bad, but who would believe a child over her long-lost aunt? Meanwhile, across town, Victoria met Michael Davis in a darkened bar. "The security codes you got from their system are perfect," he said, sliding a check across the table. "Once we expose their technical vulnerabilities and crash their stock, Montenegro Enterprises will be finished. James will lose everything. And Richard? Elena, Sophia? Victoria asked quietly. Collateral damage, Michael shrugged. Besides, isn't this what you wanted? Revenge for your mother? Victoria touched the check, thinking of Maria. Would her mother really want this? Or was she betraying Maria's memory by hurting the family she had always loved, despite everything? Back at the penthouse, Sophia finally made a decision. She crept to Richard's study where he was working late. Dad, she said softly, I need to tell you something about Aunt Victoria. I think she's trying to hurt our family. Richard looked up from his computer, seeing the worry in his daughter's eyes and the way she gripped the golden locket. Tell me everything, he said. As Sophia began to speak, the locket seemed to glow faintly in the dim room, as if Maria's spirit was watching over them, waiting to see if her granddaughter could stop her other daughter from making a terrible mistake. Richard sat in his darkened study, listening as Sophia told him everything she'd discovered about Victoria. His daughter's voice trembled, but her eyes showed the same determination he'd seen in Maria all those years ago. I found these too, Sophia said, pulling printed screenshots from her backpack. She'd used Richard's printer while Victoria was out. The images showed emails between Victoria and Michael Davis, discussing plans to destroy Montenegro Enterprises. Richard's hands clenched into fists. You did the right thing telling me, sweetheart, but this is very dangerous. Promise me you won't confront Victoria about any of this. What are you going to do? Sophia asked, touching her locket nervously. First, I'm going to protect our family. Early the next morning, Richard called an emergency meeting. Elena, Manuel, James, and his top security team gathered in the Montenegro Enterprises conference room. Only Victoria was absent, still asleep at Elena's apartment. She's been feeding information to Michael Davis, Richard explained, showing them Sophia's evidence. Security codes, system vulnerabilities, everything he needs to destroy us. Elena burst into tears. I don't believe it. She's my sister. The evidence is clear, James said grimly. We should call the police. No, Richard decided. We handle this as a family for Maria's sake. He outlined his plan. They would feed Victoria false information, leading Davis into a trap. But first, they needed to understand why Victoria had really come into their lives. That afternoon, Victoria arrived at Montenegro Enterprises for what she thought was a routine meeting. Instead, she found the entire family waiting in the conference room. What's going on? She asked, noting their serious faces. Richard laid Sophia's evidence on the table. Want to explain this? Victoria's face went pale. She looked at Sophia, who was sitting between Elena and Manuel. You little spy! Don't blame her, Richard said sharply. She was protecting her family, something you might want to think about. Victoria's composed mask cracked. Family? What would you know about family? Your father threw my mother away like garbage. I grew up watching her work 3 jobs while you lived in penthouses. So, this is revenge? James asked quietly. You deserve to lose everything, Victoria shouted. Just like we lost everything. And when you paid my mother to disappear. Is that what you think happened? James stood up slowly. That I just threw money at Maria and forgot about her? He walked to his briefcase and pulled out an old envelope. I found this when I was cleaning out my storage unit last week. I was going to show you when the time was right. Inside were dozens of cashier's checks, all made out to Maria Ramirez, dated monthly for the past 20 years. Most were uncashed. She sent them back, James explained, his voice rough with emotion. Every month I tried to provide for her and you. Every month she returned the money. She was too proud to take it, too hurt by what I'd done. The only checks she cashed were for your college tuition. Victoria staggered back. No, she said you abandoned us. I did worse than abandon you, James admitted. I tried to buy my way out of responsibility. Maria was right to reject the money. She wanted me to be a father, not a bank account. I failed both of you. Elena moved to her sister's side. Vicky, Mama loved this family, all of it. That's why she gave Sophia the locket. She wanted us to find our way back to each other. Victoria sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. Michael said he would help me get justice. that the Montenegros deserve to suffer. Michael Davis doesn't care about justice, Richard said. He's using you to destroy our company. If he succeeds, hundreds of employees will lose their jobs. Eleanor and Manuel's new life, Sophia's future, all of it will be gone. What have I done? Victoria whispered. Sophia walked over to her aunt, the golden locket gleaming at her throat. Grandma Maria's letter said the locket brings truth to light, so hearts can heal. Maybe that's why I found out your secret. Victoria touched the locket gently. She wore this every day, you know, even when times were hardest. She said it reminded her that love was more important than pride. Then help us, Richard urged. Help us stop Davis before it's too late. Victoria wiped her eyes and straightened. Her shoulders, looking so much like Maria in that moment that James had to turn away. He's planning to attack our systems tonight, she revealed. He has a team of hackers ready. Once they expose the security flaws, he'll leak everything to the press. The stock will crash before the market opens tomorrow. Richard smiled grimly. Not if we're ready for him. For the next few hours they worked together. Victoria revealed everything she knew about Davis's plan. The Montenegro tech team set up an elaborate trap, using the fake security codes Victoria had passed along. When midnight came, Davis launched his attack, only to find himself locked out of the system, his own company's vulnerabilities exposed. Instead, the evidence of corporate espionage was overwhelming. By dawn, Michael Davis was being led out of his office in handcuffs. The morning news showed him trying to hide his face from cameras, while headlines announced the attempted corporate sabotage. In Richard's penthouse, the family gathered to watch the coverage. Victoria sat apart from the others, shame still evident on her face. I'll leave New York, she said quietly. You'll never have to see me again. No, Eleanor said firmly. You're my sister. Sisters fight, they make mistakes, but they don't give up on each other. James cleared his throat. The company could use someone with your business skills. Legitimately this time, if you're interested. Victoria looked at him in surprise. After what I did? Family is about second chances, Richard said. Right, Sophia? Sophia smiled, holding her locket. Grandma Maria would want us to stay together. Victoria looked around at these people she'd planned to destroy, her sister's unconditional love, her father's attempt at redemption, her brother's forgiveness, and her niece's wisdom. She thought of her mother, who had died, still loving the family that had hurt her, still believing in the power of forgiveness. I'd like to stay, she whispered, if you'll have me. Sophia hugged her aunt tightly, the golden locket pressed between them, warm as if with Maria's approval. This time, Victoria's tears were of gratitude rather than anger. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching the locket's gleam. Another crisis had been averted, another wound began to heal. But in the world of the Montenegros, peace never lasted long. None of them could guess that their greatest challenge was still to come, one that would test their newfound unity in ways they could never imagine. 3 months after Victoria's redemption, the Montenegro family had found a new rhythm. Victoria proved herself valuable at the company, working alongside Richard to modernize their operations. James was trying to be a better father and grandfather, spending time with Sophia every weekend. Elena and Manuel had moved into a beautiful brownstone that Richard helped them buy, just blocks from his penthouse. But their peace was about to be shattered by a ghost from the past. It started with a letter delivered to Montenegro Enterprises, addressed to James. The envelope was yellowed with age, marked, "To be delivered upon my death," in familiar handwriting. It's from Elizabeth, James said, his hands shaking as he opened it in his office. Richard, Victoria, and Elena gathered around him. My dearest James, he read aloud, if you're reading this, I'm gone. There's something you need to know about the night I died. The words that followed changed everything they thought they knew about their family's past. Elizabeth hadn't died in a simple car accident, as they'd believed. She'd been driving to meet Maria that night, carrying documents that would have guaranteed Maria and Victoria's place in the Montenegro family. But she never made it to that meeting. I've discovered something terrible about the company, the letter continued, about what you've been hiding in the overseas accounts. If anything happens to me, look in the safe deposit box at First National. The key is with the locket. James looked up, his face ashen. What key? What was she talking about? Sophia, who had been doing homework in the corner of the office, suddenly spoke up. There's a tiny key inside the locket. I found it once, but couldn't figure out what it was for. All eyes turned to the golden locket around her neck. Richard carefully opened it, and there it was, a small key that had been hidden in a secret compartment for over 20 years. Dad, Richard said slowly, what was in those overseas accounts? Before James could answer, his private security burst into the office. Mr. Montenegro, there's been a break-in at your house. Someone went through your home office. James stood up so quickly his chair crashed over. No, it can't be. What's going on? Victoria demanded. Charles Wright, James whispered. My old business partner, he was there that night 20 years ago. He helped me hide things. If he knows about Elizabeth's letter. James. Montenegro. A deep voice boomed from the doorway. Charles Wright stood there, older but still imposing, flanked by two tough-looking men. I've been waiting 20 years for this moment. How did you get in here? Richard stepped in front of Sophia protectively. Money opens a lot of doors, Charles smiled coldly. Just like it closed a lot of mouths 20 years ago, right, James? Leave my family out of this, James pleaded. Family? Charles laughed harshly. You want to tell them, or should I, about how Elizabeth found out what we were doing with company money? About how she threatened to expose everything? Horror dawned on Richard's face. Dad, what did you do? Nothing, James protested. I didn't know. I thought it was just an accident. He knew, Charles cut in. He knew I arranged for her car's brakes to fail, just like he knew about all the other accidents that protected our interests over the years. Elena grabbed Sophia, pulling her close. Victoria's face had gone white with shock. You killed my mother's best friend, Victoria whispered. The woman who trusted you with everything. I was weak, James admitted, tears streaming down his face. Charles handled the messy parts. I just looked the other way. When Elizabeth said she had proof of our embezzlement scheme, you had her murdered. Richard's voice was ice. My mother, your wife. All to hide your crimes. Charles pulled out a gun. Now, here's how this goes. James comes with us quietly. We get access to those old accounts, which I'm sure he's been quietly maintaining all these years. And your family stays alive. You're not taking anyone, Richard declared. Really? Charles aimed the gun at Sophia. Want to test that theory? Everything happened at once. Victoria kicked Charles's arm as Elena pulled Sophia behind a desk. Richard tackled one of Charles's men while security finally burst in. In the chaos, James tried to run. Dad, stop, Richard shouted. But James Montenegro, the man who had spent a lifetime running from his mistakes, wouldn't stop running now. He sprinted for the private elevator. Charles broke free from Victoria and fired. The bullet meant for James hit the elevator panel, causing a shower of sparks. As James got in, something in the damaged electronics surged. The elevator plunged into darkness. Then came the horrifying sound of cables snapping. No! Richard screamed. Security subdued Charles and his men, but it was too late to stop the tragedy unfolding. The elevator crashed at the bottom of the shaft. James Montenegro's final escape had cost him everything. Hours later, the family huddled in Richard's penthouse. The police had taken Charles away. He'd already confessed everything, trying to cut a deal. 20 years of corporate crimes, conspiracy, and murder were finally coming to light. Sophia sat on the couch, holding her locket. Is great-grandpa James going to die? The doctors are doing everything they can, Richard said gently. He looked at the key they'd found in the locket. Tomorrow we'll go to the bank, finally find out what Mum was trying to tell us. Victoria touched the locket around her niece's neck. All this time, Elizabeth was trying to protect our family, to bring the truth to light. Maria knew, Elena said suddenly. That's why she gave Sophia the locket. She knew someday we'd need what was hidden inside. Richard looked around at his family. Not the one he was born into, but the one that had been forged through pain and love and truth. His sister Victoria, who had chosen redemption over revenge. Elena and Manuel, who had opened their hearts to share their daughter with him. And Sophia, who wore her grandmother's locket like a beacon of hope. "Whatever we find in that safe deposit box," he said, "we face it together." Sophia clutched her locket tightly. Grandma Maria said the locket's magic wouldn't rest until our family was whole and honest. Maybe this is what she meant. As night fell over New York City, the Montenegro family waited for news from the hospital. None of them slept, each lost in thoughts of the past and future. The golden locket gleamed in the darkness, its hidden key finally ready to unlock the last secrets that could either heal their family or tear it apart forever. The morning sun was just rising over Manhattan when Richard got the call from the hospital. James Montenegro had survived the elevator crash, but he was in critical condition. The doctors weren't sure he would ever wake up. "Like father, like son," Victoria said quietly, remembering how Richard had once been in a coma himself. "Maybe it runs in the family." They gathered in Richard's penthouse to prepare for their visit to the bank. Sophia hadn't slept all night, keeping watch over her locket like a tiny guardian. "Are we ready?" Richard asked, looking at his family. The First National Bank hadn't changed much in 20 years. The same marble columns stood guard outside. The same heavy doors opened into a world of wealth and secrets. The bank manager personally escorted them to the vault. "The safe deposit box hasn't been accessed since Mrs. Montenegro set it up," he explained. "We always wondered if anyone would ever come for it." The key from the locket fit perfectly. Inside the box, they found a thick envelope and a small recording device. Elizabeth's voice, preserved for 2 decades, filled the private viewing room. "My dearest family, if you're hearing this, then the truth has finally come out. James and Charles didn't just embezzle money. They used Montenegro enterprises to launder funds for criminal organizations. I found proof in their private records. But there's more." They listened in stunned silence as Elizabeth revealed how she had secretly documented everything, how she had planned to expose it, all not to destroy James, but to save him from Charles's influence. "I'm meeting Maria tonight," Elizabeth's voice continued. "She's agreed to help me. The evidence is all here, along with something else, something I've wanted to tell James for 20 years. The recording ended. Richard opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were documents proving every crime, every secret deal, every betrayal. But there was also a medical report. "Oh my God," Richard whispered as he read it. "What is it?" Victoria asked. "Mom, she was pregnant when she died. The medical report shows she was 8 weeks along." Richard looked up, tears in his eyes. "I was going to have a sister." Sophia, who had been quiet until now, suddenly gasped. Her locket had popped open on its own, revealing a tiny hidden compartment they hadn't noticed before. Inside was a small piece of paper, preserved perfectly. "My darling James," Sophia read aloud, "I wish I had told you sooner. We're going to have another baby, a little girl. I hope she'll be as wonderful as our Richard. All my love, Elizabeth." The truth hit them like a physical force. Elizabeth had died trying to save not just the company, but her unborn daughter. She had trusted the evidence to Maria, hiding the key in the locket that would one day unite their broken family. "We have to take this to the police," Richard said finally. "What about the company?" Victoria asked. "This will destroy everything." "Maybe it needs to be destroyed," Richard replied. "Built new on honest ground." They went to the hospital first. James Montenegro lay pale and still, machines beeping around him. Richard placed Elizabeth's last note in his father's hand. "I wish you'd trusted her," Richard said softly. "Trusted all of us." As if in response to his son's voice, James's fingers twitched, his eyes fluttered open. "Elizabeth?" he whispered. "It's me, Dad. Richard. We found Mum's letter. We know everything." Tears rolled down James's cheeks. "I didn't know it about the baby. I let Charles convince me she was going to ruin us. I was so wrong." "Yes, you were," Victoria said, stepping forward. "Just like you were wrong about Maria, about me." "Can you ever forgive me?" James asked. "We're family," Eleanor said, holding Sophia close. "That's what families do." Over the next few weeks, the truth about Montenegro Enterprises exploded across the media. Charles Wright and his conspirators went to prison. James Montenegro confessed everything from his hospital bed. Accepting responsibility at last, the company underwent a complete restructuring. Richard and Victoria worked together to rebuild it, creating a new foundation of transparency and ethics. They established a charitable trust in Elizabeth and Maria's names, dedicated to helping single mothers and their children. James survived, but would never walk again. His imprisonment would be served under house arrest due to his condition. Slowly, he began the long journey of earning his family's trust. 6 months later, they all gathered in the Montenegro family cemetery. 2. New headstones stood side by side. Elizabeth Montenegro and Maria Ramirez finally reunited. Sophia placed fresh flowers between them, the golden locket gleaming in the sunlight. "Do you think they're happy now?" she asked, looking up at Richard. "Grandma Elizabeth and Grandma Maria." "I think they're very happy," Richard smiled. "They got what they always wanted. Their family together, the truth told, love winning over lies." Victoria knelt beside Sophia. "You know, when I first came here seeking revenge, I thought I was honoring my mother's memory. But this forgiveness, family, truth, this is what she really wanted." Elena wiped away tears. "Mama always said love was stronger than pride." She was right. As they walked away from the graves, Sophia hanging between Richard and Victoria, holding both their hands, Manuel noticed something remarkable. "Look," he said, pointing to the golden locket. A ray of sunlight had struck it at just the right angle, creating a rainbow that seemed to arch over the entire family. For a moment, they could almost believe Elizabeth and Maria were smiling down on them. The locket had completed its mission. A family torn apart by lies had been rebuilt on truth. A legacy of secrets had been transformed into a future of hope. And the love of two remarkable women, Elizabeth Montenegro and Maria Ramirez, lived on in the hearts of their children and grandchildren. Sophia touched her locket one last time before they left the cemetery. "Thank you," she whispered, and though she was too young to fully understand, she knew she was thanking more than just a piece of jewelry. She was thanking the women who had loved her family enough to ensure that someday, somehow, they would find their way back to each other. As the Montenegro family drove away together, Richard and Victoria in front, Elena and Manuel holding Sophia. Between them in the back, the setting sun caught the locket's gleam one final time. Its magic had brought truth to light, healed broken hearts, and united a family across time and loss. Its work was done, but its story would be told for generations to come, a testament to the power of love over lies, of truth over deception, and of family over everything else. The end.